Hello friends, wherever you are. This is just a short story and it's called Boundaries. I'm going to read it. Now Andy had a job that had fulfilled all his dreams, but the circumstances that led to it and the closure of Carlin's dairy had been a nightmare. Andy had worked there from school in 1986 and he'd been a milkman for 10 years, but eventually gave up the outdoors that he loved to become the general manager of the dairy. By then his boss, Rory Carlin, had been his friend too. But he had never confided in Rory about how bad things had become. In 1986 things were going really well, but in 2005 they fell apart completely. It had already been a bad year because Jeannie, Andy's childhood sweetheart, had left him, preferring the charms of a policeman. But when Marie Carlin had phoned Andy in a state of shock, he'd gone to the dairy so fast that he was there before the police or the ambulance. Rory had hanged himself, and poor Marie had found him after she'd read the final note that was in the bedroom. Andy cut him down, hoping there was still life, but there was none. Distraught as a woman can be, she had handed Andy the note, which just read, "Dear Marie, the world doesn't want service, it just wants cheap and nasty. The commercial empires will drive all the small people out. I can't fight anymore and I feel there's only one escape. I'm ending it right here. Get on with your life. I hate doing this to you, but I see nothing else. The house is secure, but the dairy is done. Rory." "Not even love Rory," Marie cried as the policewoman tried to console her. Andy found it very hard to understand how Rory could do that to her, or even to him. As he watched them take his body away, he told the police he would look after Marie, and he felt that the shaft of sunlight that was coming through the skylight and the blackbird singing out somewhere was almost criminal, so cheerful in these awful circumstances. It took just a month to sort out and close the dairy. The funeral had been a large one, even by Irish standards, and Marie, holding Andy's arm tightly afterwards, had said, "Half the town is here, but none of them knew him, because I don't know the man who wrote that note, and nor do you, Andy." For once Andy was lost for words, and he was glad when the priest came to talk to her, though he wasn't sure that he would be able to help her. Their one son, who was working in Australia, either couldn't come home or chose not to come home from the funeral. In any case, once the dairy was closed and the premises on the market, Marie had been glad when Andy gave her a lift to the airport as she began a long trip for an extended holiday in Australia. Andy, along with the 5 milkmen and 4 staff from the dairy, had reluctantly gone to sign on at the job centre. "We don't have any comparable positions vacant right now," the cheery lady had told him. He informed her that he would sweep the streets, clean toilets, do anything, but very quickly learned that they had nothing to offer of any kind of position at all. A week after the dairy closed, he was strolling through the woods of the Roe Valley. He'd long known unemployment around Limb Valley was bad. A year before, they'd advertised for a milkman and there'd been 50 applications. But now he was experiencing unemployment himself. He just had to escape by filling his time with nature that he loved so much. Leaving the river, he'd come to a fence, which he climbed over. He didn't like fences. It wasn't a lack of respect for other people's property, it was rather the opposite. He knew that he would never do any damage to buildings, crops, or anything else, so he felt at liberty to stroll exactly where he chose. He didn't like boundaries of any kind much, not round fields, not between people. A person's class, their colour, their religious background meant absolutely nothing to Andy. He didn't care if they arrived on a bicycle, in a tractor, or on a Rolls Royce with a chauffeur. He'd look them in the eye and weigh up who they were and forget completely what they were, and usually it worked. Most people treated him as equal in return for him treating them as an equal. Breathing in the slightly damp, cool spring air, he carefully walked around the large patch of bluebells between a dozen beech trees in front of him. He stopped as he caught sight of a blue flash as 2 jays in an oak tree fled, not pleased to see him, like he was pleased to see them. In front of him now was a clear field of grass, a paddock with 2 beautiful horses in it, one brown and one black. He didn't know much about horses, but he did no fine beast when he saw them. He paused as a bumblebee buzzed around his head, waiting for it to continue on its morning mission. Skirting around the horse field, he came to a stream and decided to follow it upstream. All new territory to me, he said out loud. One thing about this unemployment, I suppose, is giving me time to explore. As he crossed the stream and walked up the gentle slope, a grey wagtail flew up, chirping and landing again 50 yards along the brook, flicking its tail. Watching, just as he expected, he soon saw its mate arrive too. It was so peaceful here. The only cure for his personal woes, the loss of a friend, the loss of a job, and his pending divorce. Here, though, was a different planet, where the stress seemed to melt away like snow in spring sunshine on the mountainside. To his right now, there was a fairly substantial house, which he assumed must have had a drive on the other side that led out to the main Dungiven road. He sat on a large rock with his back to the house, and watched the water, rapid and frothy white at this point as it ran over the stones and rocks on its journey to the river. It's just as well we had no kids, he said out loud, and then wondered why that thought had suddenly emerged. He scanned the woods, listening to the wood pigeon, trying to attract the attention of its mate. "I say," the voice startled him, "you do know that this is private land and you were trespassing?" He didn't turn around at first, but paused to weigh up the voice. Slightly posh, a little indignant, and certainly female, and getting closer as she talked. The red setter, though, was moving faster. But he knew the bark was a friendly greeting, and soon he was stroking the animal instinctively, and the animal obviously liked him. Turning around, he saw a woman of less than 40, dressed in a country tweed skirt and a green woolen cardigan. She had brown shoulder-length hair, and her green eyes were searching him with the intensity of a scanning machine. "That's a beautiful dog, and you really care for his coat." She was slightly disarmed by the kindly, gentle tone of his voice, and the speed with which Campbell had rolled onto his back for this stranger to rub his tummy. He rarely did that for anyone but her. "Thank you, but you failed to respond to my question. You were on private land." "Oh, right, I never knew it was a question." "Yes, I knew it was private land. Is it yours?" "Most certainly it is." She was making an effort to play the role of the lady of the manor here, in the act of apprehending a poacher, but it wasn't really a natural role for her. "Well then, if you're the owner, can I ask your permission to roam here?" "A little cheeky, isn't it? Shouldn't you ask my permission before you roam? You've got beech trees here that must be 400 years old." "Really? Why do you require authority to be allowed to roam here?" "Because it's a paradise, because it's like a tonic, and because I would love to survey it for its plants, animals, birds and fish." He looked into those green eyes, even the insects. "Why? Why would you want to do that?" "Why not?" There was something about his mixture of attitude, a kind of defiant politeness and an absence of fear, that she was finding irritatingly attractive. "I think I should be asking the questions." "Far away," he gestured toward her. Campbell looked from one to the other. "Why are you here?" "To escape." "Ha ha! So you're a man on the run, are you?" "Oh yes." "From what?" "Life, unemployment, sadness." "Oh dear." She moved a little closer and could now see the sadness in those determined brown eyes. "Having a hard time, are you?" The change in her tone of voice surprised him. "I don't think you want to hear my story." "Oh yes I do. You're on my land without permission and asking me belatedly, I add, to walk about here whenever you want to, so I need to know something about you." So he told her all about how in a few months his life had changed. She was now sitting on another rock close by. Campbell was playing in the water. When he explained about Rory's suicide, she turned her head away. He sensed something was wrong. After a few seconds he asked, "Are you okay?" "Not really," she said, wiping a tear away. "That was just a little close to home." "Sorry, I don't understand." She paused, sighed, and met those brown eyes full of concern. My husband Brian and I lived in Surrey, the stockbroker belt area. I thought we were much in love and he was very successful. Money was never a problem. To be honest, money has never been a problem in my life. But there was a scandal, insider dealing. Brian had been dishonest, even lied in court. There was also the affair that came to light in the midst of it all. His secretary, who was my best friend. One night, just before the last day of the trial, he didn't come home. And they found his body the next morning just downstream from Chelsea Bridge. The police came. She paused to gather her emotions, trying not to sob. Sighing again, she continued, the coroner's verdict was suicide. I just had to get away. I grew up here in the Roe Valley, so I took what was left and bought this, the house, the stables, the outbuildings, and approximately 150 acres of woodland and meadow. I'm so sorry, he said, moved by those moist green eyes. It's a pity you have had such a hard time. And I'm truly sorry for you too. And so you have no employment. No, and it's hard, you know, there's no prospects, and I always love being at work. She looked at her watch. Oh dear, I'll be late. I have an appointment with Maggie to get my hair cut, but you have my permission to roam on my land as often as you choose to. Please be my guest. Thank you. And if ever I can help you, well, you can certainly let me know what you say. My whole point in buying this was trying to put something back, to preserve a haven for fauna and flora. So your observations would be very helpful. 2 weeks later, both of them were regretting that they had not even exchanged names. Now you have to wait for part 2. This is in 2 halves, and I'll continue in a while when I've cleared this off the camera because I run out of space. Thank you for listening to the first part. Second part to follow shortly.